Are you ready to learn the truth about whose fates paid for the reputation of the wealthiest families of the 19th century? Behind the glittering facades of the mansions of the Gilded Age lay a harsh system where the guilt of others easily became a convenient commodity. Young women hired to maintain comfort often became invisible human shields for their high-ranking employers. Watch the video to the end to learn how one false accusation could forever destroy hopes for a happy marriage and a peaceful life. What if I told you that everything you believed was a lie? The impeccable image of the Victorian lady was often built on the absolute self-denial of her personal maid. In the huge mansions of New York, the wives of industrialists led secret lives hidden behind heavy velvet curtains. When secret letters risked falling into the hands of the lawful spouse, all the blame was instantly shifted onto the shoulders of the powerless servants. The employer generously paid for this salvation of her reputation with small silver coins or an old dress. But these pitiful gifts could not compensate for the shame that fell on the shoulders of the dismissed woman. She was ordered to gather her modest belongings in just 1 hour and leave the wealthy house forever. The maid descended the narrow, dark staircase, listening to the carefree dinner party continuing upstairs. Standing on the rain-soaked pavement, she realized that there was no way back into decent society. Without a letter of recommendation from her former employers, it was completely impossible to find work in another wealthy household. Yesterday's trusted chambermaid had suddenly become an outcast, barred from all respectable estates. Her reputation had been sacrificed so that her mistress could continue to shine at balls. High society did not forgive mistakes made by those at the bottom of the social ladder. While wealthy ladies easily got off scot-free, their maids lost their only source of income. Respectable matrons shared stories over tea about ungrateful girls, unaware of the true state of affairs. This hypocritical system reliably protected the peace of the rich, grinding down the fates of ordinary workers. This invisible mechanism of shifting responsibility worked flawlessly for decades. Maids became a convenient lightning rod for all the family storms that raged in the homes of the Gilded Age. No one was interested in how the life of a woman who had been expelled in disgrace would turn out. Her fate dissolved into the fog of the dirty factory streets where she was forced to go. Today, it is difficult for us to imagine the depth of despair of a person deprived of the right to protect their own dignity. These quiet tragedies played out daily, leaving no trace in the official historical chronicles. We are very interested to hear your point of view on this distortion of concepts in high society, so please write about it in the comments. And be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any new videos. I will reveal the most closely guarded secret of this brilliant and ruthless era. Ladies of high society often spent huge fortunes on silks, lace, and hats, hiding the real bills from their husbands. When it came time to pay creditors, the chambermaid was suddenly accused of large-scale embezzlement. The girl was forced to bow her head meekly and accept the label of a fraudster in order to save her employer's marriage. Interestingly, the owners of fashionable shops knew perfectly well who was buying expensive velvet and fine batiste. However, they preferred to remain silent so as not to lose their lucrative and high-ranking customers. The merchants played along with the rich ladies, confirming the fabricated stories about treacherous maids. The mutual support of high society left the simple worker no chance of justification. As a result of such dismissal, a woman lost not only her job, but also her faith in human decency. She realized that her loyalty and impeccable work meant nothing in the world of big money. Illusions about kind and noble employers were shattered at the first serious conflict. Naivety was replaced by bitter resignation to fate and fear of tomorrow. Many of these girls served in the same family for years, becoming almost indispensable assistants. They knew all the habits of their mistresses, knew how to do complicated hairstyles, and masterfully smoothed out wrinkles in silk. But all this experience was negated by a single false accusation of embezzlement. The talented craftswoman was forced to take on the hardest and dirtiest work in laundries. History has preserved many letters in which former maids begged their mistresses for leniency. They asked for at least a small recommendation to get a job in a factory or a cheap sewing workshop. But aristocratic women rarely responded to these desperate messages, preferring to erase the unpleasant episode from their memory. It was much easier for them to hire a new girl and continue their usual idle life. These broken lives remain the invisible foundation on which the ostentatious prosperity of the 19th century was built. Do you think such blind devotion was worth a completely ruined life and a lost future? Watch the video before the next chapter to find out what dark secrets the empty jewelry boxes held. A secret passed down from generation to generation often conceals the bitterness of someone else's tears. In wealthy homes, family jewels were considered a status symbol, and damaging them would provoke the wrath of the owner. If a lady accidentally dropped an antique brooch or lost a pearl from her necklace, she would never admit it to her husband. It was much safer to blame the clumsy maid who had cleaned the bedroom that morning. Police archives from that time contain hundreds of cases of missing brooches and massive gold rings. However, most of them were closed immediately after the sudden dismissal of another chambermaid or laundress. Society believed that justice had prevailed, for the guilty party had been punished by expulsion from a respectable home. The true circumstances of these incidents remained a secret, hidden behind the tightly drawn curtains of the mansions. The mistress, who had lost her ring during a secret rendezvous, sighed with relief as she closed the door behind the maid. She easily sacrificed the young girl's reputation for the sake of her own comfort and status. In her eyes, the servant was just a convenient tool that could be discarded at the first opportunity. Lack of empathy was a characteristic feature of many members of the upper class during the Age of Splendor. A girl dismissed with such a stigma could no longer find employment in the homes of the city's respected families. She was left to seek work in dubious establishments or in heavy factory production where no references were required. Delicate hands accustomed to handling fine lace were now rubbed raw by coarse wool or cold metal. Social decline was a rapid and completely irreversible process for women of that time. Many of these maids were never able to forgive their former mistresses for this cruel betrayal. They carried their resentment throughout their difficult lives, remembering the luxurious living rooms as the embodiment of the highest injustice. Their invisible tears remained on the polished surfaces of the antique furniture they once lovingly waxed. The price of the shiny facade of a Victorian mansion was exorbitantly high for those who lived in the attic. Today, these stories make us look at the glittering world of antique jewelry in a new light. Behind every diamond necklace may lie the drama of a person whose fate was broken for the sake of its preservation. If you were moved by this story, please like this video so that more people will learn about such invisible tragedies. This is what happens behind the closed doors of luxurious dining rooms when the lights go out at a dinner party. Wealthy homes often hosted high-ranking guests whose behavior did not always conform to strict rules of etiquette. Gentlemen could afford to be rude, and wealthy ladies could indulge in frank whims and even petty theft. Once again, the unprotected servants became the perfect lightning rod for any brewing scandal. Things were even worse when respectable guests secretly took small valuable items with them. Silver spoons, crystal decanter stoppers, or antique snuff boxes often disappeared after crowded receptions. It was unthinkable to call a lord or senator's wife a thief, as this would mean the end of the host's social life. Therefore, the loss was blamed on a dishonest cook or a new housekeeper. Such incidents ruined not only careers, but also the self-esteem of many women. They understood that in this huge mansion, their rights were less protected than antique interior items. The constant fear of being blamed for something they did not do poisoned every day of their prestigious service. The luxurious interiors became the backdrop for endless psychological pressure and hidden humiliation. Interestingly, experienced maids tried to pass on to young girls the rules of survival in such wealthy homes. They taught them to be completely invisible, never to look up at guests, and to blend in with the wallpaper. The main rule was to be able to disappear into thin air at the slightest sign of an impending social conflict. But even this extreme caution did not always save them from suddenly becoming the scapegoat. The fates of these women were like grains of sand, ground down by the millstones of others' vanity and social hypocrisy. They left their wealthy homes, taking with them the bitter knowledge of what high society was really like. Their modest wooden chests contained no silver spoons, but their hearts were filled with deep sorrow. They learned to live anew, relying only on their own strength and incredible diligence. Guess what happened next to those who lost their place in such harsh circumstances? In the next chapter, you will learn what trials these women faced on cold nights after the reckoning. The moment of dismissal was always the most difficult trial in the life of any domestic worker. As a rule, the settlement was made late in the evening, so that quiet tears would not disturb the peace of the respected employers. The girl was ordered to pack her belongings within half an hour and leave the mansion before midnight. No one cared whether she had money for a carriage or a place to spend the night safely. The transition from the position of personal maid to that of a menial laundress was a huge step down. Hands accustomed to fastening tiny buttons on silk dresses were now immersed in caustic soap solution for days on end. Her back ached from constantly bending over the wooden trough, and the hot steam made it hard to breathe. She quickly became severely exhausted, leaving her face with premature wrinkles and deep fatigue. Some girls tried to return to their home villages, but this path was often closed due to lack of money. A train ticket was expensive, and confessing to their families about their shameful dismissal was tantamount to a real social disaster. Parents who were proud of their daughter serving in a wealthy New York home simply would not believe in her innocence. Therefore, most preferred to stay in the big city, gradually descending lower and lower on the social ladder. The lack of support and total loneliness broke even the most resilient and determined women of that time. They saved on food, buying only stale bread and cheap tea to pay for a tiny cold room. In winter, such rooms often had no heating, and they had to sleep covered with old woolen coats. Yesterday's comfortable life in the servants' quarters now seemed like an unattainable and beautiful distant dream. None of her former employers ever inquired about the fate of the girl they had unjustly accused. They easily replaced her with a new, obliging worker, forgetting about the unpleasant incident the very next day. The wheels of the class system ground human lives without a sound, keeping the facades of the mansions perfectly clean. The luxury of some was always paid for by the severe deprivation and personal tragedies of others. These nameless women disappeared into the growing industrial districts, becoming part of a huge army of factory workers. Their stories were not printed in the society columns, but they were the real price of the glamour that the era was so proud of. The hidden truth that everyone keeps quiet about is what happened to these women after the front doors closed. Having lost hope of finding a place in a good home, former maids moved en masse to large industrial centers. Cities shrouded in black smoke from factory chimneys offered hard work without unnecessary questions about the past. No one needed letters of recommendation there, as factory owners only needed new workers. The harsh reality of factory work quickly destroyed their health, leaving no time to recover. The lack of proper nutrition and constant drafts led to chronic fatigue and constant weakness. But it was impossible to stop, as missing even one day of work meant dismissal and hunger. The factory system was as ruthless as aristocratic society, only it did not hide it behind fine words. Moving to an industrial city meant a complete break with everything these women had known before. They lost touch with their few friends among the servants who remained in respectable neighborhoods. There was no one to write letters to, and there was no money to buy envelopes and stamps on such a meager salary. Loneliness became their constant companion, echoing hollowly in their hearts against the backdrop of the roar of heavy machinery. It is interesting to observe how their view of the world changed after encountering the reality of factory life. Illusions about a just social order were finally dispelled, giving way to cold pragmatism. The women understood that they were just cogs in a huge machine that produced wealth for other people. This bitter wisdom made their faces stern, forever erasing the carefree smiles of their lost youth. Factory whistles marked their new, joyless days, filled with hard and monotonous labor to the point of exhaustion. Former chambermaids accustomed to serving morning tea in porcelain cups now drank murky boiling water from tin mugs. The contrast between their fates is the most vivid illustration of how cruel life could be to an honest person. And all this was a direct consequence of a single false accusation in a distant and glorious past. Do you know how such a stigma affected their hopes of one day finding happiness? Watch the video before the next chapter, and you will learn why these women remained alone forever. In the 19th century, reputation was a simple woman's most important and often only asset. If she was dismissed in scandal, a girl lost not only her salary, but also all chances of a successful marriage. Honest craftsmen and shopkeepers kept a very close eye on the past of their future brides. Rumors of theft or insolence, even if they were false, permanently closed the door to a happy marriage. Over the years, the hope of starting a family faded, and women devoted themselves entirely to hard daily work. They understood that they would have to provide for themselves until the very end of their lives. The thought of their own old age frightened them most of all, because they would have no relatives to bring them a glass of water. The prospect of ending their days in a lonely, cold attic became increasingly real and frightening. The lavish weddings of their former employers' daughters now seemed like a cruel mockery of their unjust fate. The newspapers constantly printed details about the bride's dresses and the thousands of dollars in dowries collected by their influential fathers. And those who once ironed these lace dresses were forced to wear old dark skirts. The gap between these two worlds was widening, and there were no bridges across it. Interestingly, society condemned not the ladies who slandered their maids, but the girls themselves. It was believed that if a woman could not hold on to a good position, then there was something wrong with her from the start. Such condemnation in the 19th century worked flawlessly, always protecting the interests of the powerful and wealthy of this world. The voice of a poor worker was too quiet to drown out the chorus of public indifference and contempt. As a result, these women formed a kind of caste of invisible workers, forever deprived of family comfort. Their only refuge was hard work, which took up all their time and left them no energy for bitter reflection. They gave their youth and unspent tenderness to strangers, never knowing the joy of their own quiet home. Their untold love stories remain forever buried under the weight of unjust accusations. Today, we can only remember these women with deep sadness, whose lives were broken for the sake of someone else's comfort. Their quiet dignity and ability to survive in the most difficult conditions command enormous respect. The desire to escape the factory routine and return to their usual work forced many women to take desperate measures. The only way to find employment in a wealthy household again was to completely change their identity and create a new biography. Former maids took on different names, made up stories about recently deceased relatives, and bought fake references. It was a huge risk that, if exposed, could have resulted in a court case for fraud. Those who managed to hide their secret for years paid a huge psychological price for it. They gradually forgot who they really were, dissolving into their invented roles as submissive and nameless maids. Their lives turned into an endless performance with no intermissions or audience applause. The woman's true face was forever hidden behind the mask of an impeccable Victorian servant. Even when they received their wages, they could not openly send money to their elderly parents in their native village. Letters had to be sent through trusted intermediaries so as not to reveal their new location and fictitious names. This detachment from their roots brought inexpressible longing, which only intensified on cold, long winter evenings. Women cried into their pillows, realizing that their sacrifice would remain unappreciated and invisible to everyone. Interestingly, the employers themselves often admired the modesty and silence of such workers, unaware of the true reasons for their behavior. Silence was perceived as a sign of good manners, rather than a desperate attempt to hide their exposed identity. The ideal maid was convenient precisely because she seemed to have neither a past nor an opinion of her own. Her false life fit perfectly into the luxurious setting of the affluent society of the Gilded Age. The double life was exhausting, leaving deep shadows on their faces and premature gray hair. By the age of 40, many of them looked like old women, exhausted from the constant struggle for survival. They did not ask much of fate, just a roof over their heads, warm food, and no scandals. But even these basic things came at the cost of incredible effort and constant deception. The phenomenon of false names among servants is clear evidence of how desperate the situation was for dismissed women. They took this step against their own identity simply because society left them no other choice. Sometimes the blame game took an even more cynical and calculating turn. If the mistress's secret was too serious, simply dismissing the maid was not enough to ensure her safety. Secret agreements were made, according to which the former employee received a small monthly payment for her silence. This deal was sealed not by a contract, but by mutual fear of an inevitable public scandal and disgrace. The dismissed woman regularly came to the agreed place to receive a simple envelope from a trusted person. This money could not provide her with a comfortable life, but it helped her not to perish in the cold slums. The mistress bought her peace of mind at the lowest price, haggling fiercely for every cent with her former maid. Dependence on these pitiful payments made the maid a perpetual hostage to someone else's dirty secret. This vicious practice of secret ransoms deeply corrupted both sides of the unspoken and shameful agreement. The mistresses grew accustomed to impunity, believing that any consequences of their misdeeds could be bought for a handful of change. And the maids lost faith in honest labor, growing accustomed to living in anticipation of handouts from their tormentors. The social gap between them was quickly filled with complete hypocrisy, mutual hatred, and constant fear. In the rare cases when the secret did come out, society blamed it solely on the greedy servants. Newspapers constantly wrote about treacherous girls who harmed respectable families, completely ignoring the root cause of the conflict. The public, thirsty only for scandalous details and condemnation of the lower classes, was never interested in the true state of affairs. The truth remained securely locked in the cramped rooms of boarding houses, along with those who really knew it. Many women who received such envelopes eventually lost themselves in the realization of their helplessness and shame. They could not find the strength to continue living a normal life, feeling completely broken. Their fates ended at the very bottom of society, far from the glittering lights of the mansions where they once worked. Their enforced silence went with them forever to nameless graves on the outskirts of industrial megacities. The system of secret buyouts was just another powerful tool for exploiting vulnerable segments of the population in the 19th century. It proves that moral principles often gave way in the face of social privilege and enormous wealth. The final act of this life drama was the lonely and hopeless old age of women whose destinies had been broken in their youth. Years of hard physical labor in factories or laundries irreparably destroyed their once robust health. Their backs bent under the weight of their years, their eyesight failed, and their hands trembled from occupational diseases. They could no longer work at full capacity, which meant the loss of their last, already meager means of subsistence. In those days, there were no government social support programs for single elderly people. A woman who was unable to marry and accumulate savings found herself completely defenseless in the face of impending poverty. Many of them were forced to move into charitable night shelters, where the conditions resembled those of a strict workhouse. Their long days consisted of thin soup, damp cold, and dreary waiting in the company of other lonely old women. In tiny rooms lit only by a dim candle, they often indulged in memories of their distant youth. What came to mind were not dirty streets and hard work, but the glittering halls and luxurious dresses of their former mistresses. They clearly remembered the smell of expensive perfumes and the rustle of silk skirts, as if it were the most vivid event in their dull lives. Paradoxically, time erased their resentment, leaving only nostalgia for the beauty they had once timidly touched. They had no family of their own to brighten their final years with care and simple attention. Their only companions were their neighbors at the night shelter, who had equally sad and very similar stories from their past. The women talked quietly, sharing what remained of their unspent warmth in this indifferent and completely empty world. Heavy loneliness was the most terrible burden that they carried uncomplainingly on their fragile shoulders until the very end. None of the representatives of high society ever remembered those who had sacrificed their reputation for their peace of mind. Former mistresses, turned into respectable matrons, rested carefree in their warm and incredibly cozy country estates. They had long forgotten the names of the maids they had so ruthlessly and easily thrown out late at night. The gap between these two worlds was absolute and insurmountable, even on the threshold of eternity. History has not preserved for us portraits of these modest workers, whose faces have long since merged into one common, sad image. But their silent presence is always felt in the background of any formal photograph from the late 19th century. They stand in the shadows holding heavy trays in their hands, forever remaining the invisible heroines of someone else's wonderful celebration. Their obedience and incredible fortitude deserve to be remembered today with great respect and sympathy. Their tragic fates are forever woven into the complex pattern of the historical fabric of the Gilded Age, reminding us of the importance of compassion. The story of these incredible women is not just a sad tale of the past, but an important lesson about the true cost of social inequality and vulnerability. What other hidden aspects of 19th century life do you think deserve our attention and discussion in future videos? Please suggest topics for future videos you would like to see on our channel in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe.